Hello and welcome to this game review. We'll have a look at a game in which the bishop pair and compensation for a pawn were important factors, as well as a position with opposite colored bishops has occurred, in which everything can go wrong very quickly. So it started as a quali system. In general, I wouldn't really suggest playing systematic openings as they're not really allowing us to develop our full understanding of chess. Because we're not really using our brain, we're just pushing the same moves every game. Not to mention, there's no chance of a real advantage here for white, as black has many ways to play against such systems. But okay, both sides developed their pieces. Rook e1, a6, kind of a strange move, but I guess it's possible. White took and played e4. So basically white is trying to play some kind of semi-Slav type of position with colors reversed, but generally this is not a very good way to play for an advantage. So queen b6 was played, queen e2, knight g4, so this is a bit too ambitious by black. After rook f1, nothing is happening on f2, and now these pieces are a bit strangely placed. So bishop d7, h3, the knight has to go back. Now white could have won a pawn by taking on d5. Admittedly, something similar happened in the game. Black can take here and then recapture. And for example here, black would have some compensation for the pawn because he has the bishop pair. This unopposed light-squared bishop is important and it influences the queen side. Also, white is not yet developed, his knights aren't that great, so white will have some technical problems while black has pretty easy development. So instead white traded first, but now winning this pawn is not very good because now that the knights are traded, the position is opened up a little bit more, which means white's lack of development is felt a little more. And for example, after bishop b5, and this is a bit uncomfortable for white as he has to weaken his position since he cannot move the rook. For example, c4, rook a d8, and black has some initiative for the pawn. The bishops will be lined up quite well, and black is not worse, he's probably a little bit better. Instead, bishop e6, this is similar. And a few moves later, black lost his compensation for the pawn by moving around the rook and allowing white to develop easily. And now white took back the bishop pair. And now we got this position where white is a pawn up, but this is not entirely important because the pawn advantage will only count in an endgame where white will be able to push his queenside majority, but for now the piece activity is the most important factor and king safety. And clearly this king is slightly less safe because he has this rook on f5, which has some potential to help attacking towards the g2 square. So bishop e3 happened, and here this was probably a good moment to play the move f3. So admittedly it is quite risky. There are some sacrifices, but they don't work at the moment. For example, after rook e8 we have to move the queen, and after we move the bishop to f2 we will have consolidated finally on the light squares. We have our pawns defending the light squares, and black doesn't really have much of an attack. He does have compensation, but that's basically it. And white can slowly try to develop his queenside pawn majority. But queen g4 was played, but this move is not very good because after rook f6 there is a big threat of rook g6, and there's actually not too much white can do about this. One engine suggestion is just to give up the exchange like this, maybe put the bishop on d4 and hope to survive like this. But after queen g5, now black found this tactic of bishop takes g2, but this tactic doesn't really work. Black could have almost won the game by this nice move, bishop to f3, moving the attacked bishop, and now if the rook moves, then the rook g6 of course wins. So white cannot move the rook, so he will have to give up the exchange. So instead bishop g2 was played, and now white could have survived by taking the bishop. Black has to play rook g6, this was his point. Now bishop g5 is the only move, and black can go to some rook endgame, but white doesn't have any problems there. For example, if queen e6 or something, black will eventually take back the piece, and sure, white's king will be slightly weak, but it's nothing too critical. Instead, king h2, but now after bishop h3 for example, but after rook g6 more so, black is just completely winning long term because of this weak king. The pawn count is only 1 for black, but that doesn't matter. Black will always checkmate from this position, and white's king basically has no chance to survive such positions. So the game ended quite quickly, even though the engine only says -2. This position is basically hopeless in practice, so we cannot lose all of our cover like this. And here queen g2 and bishop g5 should have been calculated, because the alternative is basically resigning. We can't really play this position. For example, had black played here, we have to move the queen, he moves the bishop, and it's basically over in many ways. So as they say, the opposite colored bishops favor the attacking side, just like here.